Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Murph, and in today's video, I'm bringing you guys an advanced Frost Mage AoE guide, which is going to be covering the AoE burst rotation, a regular AoE rotation, a bunch of key talents and abilities that you guys will want to be aware of, how they interact with our spells, and how we want to use them properly. Before we get into the actual video, I wanted to thank you guys for helping us become a YouTube partner, which means you guys are now able to support the channel by becoming members and leaving super thanks and super likes. So if you guys want to support me and future videos, definitely consider supporting here. I also offer one-on-one coaching lessons directly through my Discord channel. So if you guys want to pop by, interact with me, be a part of the community, I'm going to leave a link to that in the description of this video. But with all of that said, let's get into the video. Okay, so to start out today's video, I want to cover some key talents and talk about some abilities that are vital to our AoE rotation that you want to be aware of, how they interact with our spells, how to get the most out of each of these talents individually so that you guys can go into a dungeon and be as aware of all of our spell interactions as possible and get the most out of your Frost Mage. Okay, so to get started in today's video, the first talent that we are going to cover is Splitting Ice. Now, Splitting Ice is just a super passive talent that if you've ever played a Frost Mage or been in a group with a Frost Mage, you'll notice that your spells are cleaving. So Splitting Ice is going to make your Ice Lance and your Icicles hit a second nearby target for 90% of their damage. But more importantly, it's also going to make your Glacial Spike hit a secondary nearby target for 100% of its damage. Now, this is pretty passive. It's just extra cleave damage. And this is why Frost Mage has been known historically to be really good at two-target cleave. Now, there is a cool interaction with Splitting Ice, where with Glacial Spike, we can force Glacial Spike to shatter on two targets at the same time. Now, when you're in a really big AoE pull, Splitting Ice is generally going to try and cleave its spells onto the target that is closest to your main target. But when you're in a pull that has 10, 15, 20 enemies and they're all stacked on top of each other, it's really hard to know what other target your Splitting Ice is going to try and cleave to. But what we can do in AoE when we cast Glacial Spike, because we don't know 100% of the time what target is going to be cleaved onto, we can use spells such as Ice Nova, Frost Nova, or our pet's freeze ability to force every enemy in a pack to be frozen. So no matter what our Glacial Spike cleaves to, it's going to be hitting a frozen target and benefiting from shatter. Now, what this is going to look like, since we have 5 Icicles here and we are ready to cast a Glacial Spike, if I do not know which of these two targets my Glacial Spike is going to cleave onto, what I can do is at the very tail end of my Glacial Spike cast, I can either cast Ice Nova. If I'm close enough, I can cast a Frost Nova. Or if I have Icy Veins up, I can use my pet's freeze ability to force freeze all of these enemies. So no matter which one of these targets my Glacial Spike decides to cleave onto, it's going to be frozen and it's going to benefit from shatter. So what we'll do here is I will use Glacial Spike into Ice Nova. And what you guys are going to see is it's going to freeze all these targets. As you could tell, my Glacial Spike cleaved over to the target on the right, and it crit, benefiting from shatter. So again, in an actual dungeon scenario where there are a bunch of enemies all grouped right on top of each other, kind of like how these training dummies are positioned, I'm not sure which target my Glacial Spike is going to cleave onto, which is why it's so important to use things like Ice Nova and Frost Nova to help you shatter your Glacial Spikes, because you can essentially get double damage out of a single cast of Glacial Spike. So again, we have 4 targets all right on top of each other. I don't know which one is going to be the target of my Splitting Ice. So when I use Glacial Spike, I'm going to follow it up with an Ice Nova. No matter which target it hits, it's going to be shattering, gaining a massive increased chance to critically strike. And again, you can do this with Frost Nova and with your pet's freeze ability as well. Next up, we have 2 core talents that are vital to our AoE rotation as a Frost Mage, and this is going to be Ice Collar and Freezing Rain. Now, these 2 talents play into each other, and what Ice Collar is going to do is anytime that your Blizzard spell deals damage, it's going to reduce the cooldown of your Frozen Orb by 0.5 seconds. This is really important because the more enemies you're able to hit with Blizzard, the faster you're going to be getting your cooldown reduction on your Frozen Orb, so you can throw out another one, and the more Frozen Orbs we get out, the more damage we're going to be doing. So this feeds into Freezing Rain and vice versa, where Freezing Rain reads, when you use Frozen Orb, for the next 12 seconds, it's going to make your Blizzard an instant cast spell, and it's going to increase its damage done by 60%. So when you use Frozen Orb, you're going to be able to put down Blizzards instantly with increased damage, and every single instance of damage from those Blizzards is going to be contributing cooldown reduction to your next Frozen Orb. One thing to keep in mind with Freezing Rain is that if you get your Frozen Orb reset via Ice Collar and you throw out another Frozen Orb during the duration of your first Freezing Rain buff, this will refresh the duration of Freezing Rain. So if you're able to get enough frozen orbs out, you can keep the instant cast Blizzard buff going throughout the entirety of an AoE pull. So what this is going to look like, if we throw out a frozen orb, I want you guys to pay attention to my cooldown of my frozen orb. So we'll throw down frozen orb. We're going to gain Freezing Rain for 12 seconds. This is going to make my Blizzard instant cast. And when my Blizzard is on the ground hitting enemies, as you can see down here, my frozen orb is gaining massive cooldown reduction. And again, the more targets that your Blizzard is able to hit, the faster you're going to get your frozen orb back. And given you're hitting enough targets, you can actually get your frozen orb reset almost immediately. If you think of pulls like the first pull in Solia's Gambit, or maybe the first pull in Halls of Atonement, when you're pulling, 10, 15, 20 enemies at a time, your frozen orb is going to be getting reset almost immediately, and you're able to shoot out frozen orbs very regularly. And like I was saying, when you get a frozen orb reset and you throw out another frozen orb, you're going to be refreshing the duration of Freezing Rain, so you're able to kind of keep this combo rolling. Next up, we have two talents that are the biggest component to our AoE burst rotation, and this is going to be Fractured Frost and Death's Chill. Now, both of these talents only come into play when you are in your Icy Veins window, so while Icy Veins is active. When you have Icy Veins active, Fractured Frost is going to make your Frostfire bolts cleave and hit 2 additional targets. So every cast of Frostfire bolt can potentially hit up to 3 enemies. This is really important because when we read Death's Chill, this also says while Icy Veins is active, damaging an enemy with Frostfire Bolt increases spell damage by 1%, and this stacks up to 15 times. So given that you're able to hit 3 targets via Fractured Frost with every cast of Frostfire Bolt, instead of gaining 1% bonus spell power via Death's Chill, we're going to be gaining 3% bonus spell power per cast of Frostfire Bolt up to 15 times. So depending on the pull size and the key level and how fast the enemies are dying, you can either opt to cast 4 Frostfire Bolts to go up to 12% increased spell power, or if you think that the enemies are going to live long enough, you can go all the way up to 15, which is going to be 5 casts of Frostfire Bolt. So this is super important because in Icy Veins, we also are going to be summoning a Water Elemental that by itself is going to be stacking another bonus to our spell power of 15%. So that 15% spell power bonus from our Water Elemental on top of the 15% spell power bonus from Death's Chill means that we, in our Icy Veins, are going to be having 30% increased spell power, which is an incredibly huge amount of extra damage. And we want to be taking as much advantage of that as we possibly can and doing as much damage during that time frame that we possibly can. So Death's Chill, it requires you to stack it up, but it is well worth it. This is where the majority of our burst damage is going to be coming from. I highly recommend that you guys play with this talent and get used to stacking this up and, incorporating this into your gameplay. It's going to make you think more about your cooldown usage because, again, you're going to use Icy Veins, but you then have to spend some time stacking up this spell power bonus, but it is well worth it to get all the bonus damage. So what Death's Chill is going to look like in AoE, and I will demonstrate this once we get into the actual full rotation here, is when you use Icy Veins, it is going to cause your Frostfire Bolts to cleave onto 2 additional targets. And like I was saying with Death's Chill, every single time that Frostfire Bolt hits a target, you're going to be gaining 1% increased spell power. So if we're able to cleave and hit 3 targets, we're gaining 3% increased spell power every time we cast Frostfire Bolt. And this is going to stack all the way up to 15%. What you guys will notice here when I start casting is right above my cast bar, I use the in-game cooldown manager to track my Death's Chill, and you guys are going to see me stack this up. So if I pop Icy Veins and I start using Frostfire Bolt, as you can see right above my cast bar right here, you can see my Death's Chill, and we used 5 Frostfire Bolts, and we're now at 15% increased spell power because, like I said, since our Frostfire Bolts were cleaving, we were gaining 3% bonus spell power per cast. So 3 times 5, we're up to 15 stacks already. And now that we have this 15% increase to our spell power, we also have another 15% increased spell power to our frost damage from our Water Elemental. So again, 30% increased spell damage in total, which is why this is so important to stack up and get used to playing. Next up, let's talk about Comet Storm. So Comet Storm is going to probably be your hardest hitting spell throughout the course of an entire dungeon. So Comet Storm itself isn't going to do the most damage, but thanks to our hero talent tree, the Frostfire talent tree, we play with a talent called Isothermic Core, which means anytime that we use a Comet Storm, we're also going to be summoning a Meteor every single time that we cast Comet Storm. And thanks to our current tier set bonus, this Meteor is going to be doing 30% increased damage. And when you add the Meteor and Comet Storm damage together at the end of a key, it will generally be probably your highest overall damage. Just think of Meteor as extra damage on your Comet Storm. Now, Comet Storm is so good and such a valuable button, does so much damage that we need to make sure that we are shattering Comet Storm every single time that we press this button. Now, we can do this multiple different ways. We can shatter Comet Storm with Cone of Cold, with the Coldest Snap talent, which we will discuss here in just a moment. You can shatter it with Ice Nova, you can shatter it with Frost Nova, and you can shatter it with your pet's freeze ability. And in single target, you can shatter Comet Storm by applying Winter's Chill from Flurry. So again, like I was saying, Comet Storm does so much of our overall damage that you need to make sure that you are shattering this ability every single time that you cast it. If you have Comet Storm available, but you do not currently have a way to ensure that it's going to shatter, you need to hold on to Comet Storm for a couple of seconds to ensure that you can shatter it, or else you are missing out on a ton of potential damage. Now, the best way for us to ensure that Comet Storm is being shattered is via Cone of Cold with our Coldest Snap talent, but we're going to discuss that here in a moment. When you don't have Cone of Cold available to apply Winter's Chill in AoE, what you want to do is after you use Comet Storm, you either want to immediately follow it up with Ice Nova, Frost Nova, or your pet's freeze ability. So what this is going to look like is as soon as you use Comet Storm takes about a second to have the meteors actually start hitting the target. So what this means is we have enough time with our global cooldown to follow it up with an ability that's going to freeze enemies. So as you guys will see here, I'm going to cast Comet Storm and we're going to follow it up with an Ice Nova. This Ice Nova is going to freeze everything temporarily, and it's going to cause all of the hits from our Comet Storm and our Meteor to crit because everything was frozen, even if it was just for a second. And like I was saying, you can also do this with Frost Nova. If you do not have Ice Nova available, you can run into melee range and do the same sequence, but with Frost Nova. So if we Comet Storm here, and then we follow it up with Frost Nova, as you'll see, all my Comets and my Meteor all shattered against all these targets. Now, when we're in a dungeon, there are times where we're going to be doing pure single target, like on most boss fights. So in single target, the same rules apply. You only want to cast Comet Storm if you're able to shatter it. So the way we do this in single target is by applying Winter's Chill via Flurry. So when you have Comet Storm available, you want to ensure that you use Flurry first to apply Winter's Chill to the target, and then follow it up with Comet Storm. Another cool thing about Comet Storm is that it benefits from Winter's Chill, but it does not consume it. So you are able to get the added extra benefit of Winter's Chill even after you use your Comet Storm. Just like in AoE, if you don't have a way to shatter your Comet Storm on single target, say you don't have a Brain Freeze proc or you have no charges of Flurry, you want to hold on to your Comet Storm until you gain Flurry, because shattering Comet Storm is so vital to our overall damage that you do not just want to send it naked into a target that doesn't have Winter's Chill. So again, you always want to ensure that you have Winter's Chill applied to the target before you use your Comet Storm. Now, as we discussed, the reason why Comet Storm is so crucial to shatter every single time that we press it is because of Isothermic Core and the Meteor that is going to also be summoned when we press Comet Storm. Now, our tier set bonus plays very heavily into this, at least our 2-piece, where Meteor and Frostfire burst damage is increased by 30%. 30% on our Meteor means that Meteor is going to generally be your second or third highest damage throughout the entire course of a dungeon. And when you add that damage onto the damage from Comet Storm, generally it's going to be your hardest hitting ability. Now, if we take a look at a damage breakdown from a plus 15 Dawnbreaker that I ran yesterday, as you guys will be able to see, my Meteor is my second highest damaging ability throughout the entire course of the key. My Meteor did about 510 million damage. Now, as I was mentioning earlier, you want to think of Meteor as just additional damage on your Comet Storm ability. So when you're looking at a damage breakdown here, what I like to do is add Meteor and Comet Storm together because they both come from the same button press. So my Comet Storm itself also did about 342 million damage. So this comes out to be around 850 million total damage from me pressing my Comet Storm button, since we're adding Meteor damage into Comet Storm damage. And as you can see, 850 million is more damage than even my Glacial Spike was doing. This is why it's so crucial that we need to shatter Comet Storm every single time that we press it. Lastly, to round out our core AoE talents, we have Coldest Snap. So what this does is it's going to turn your Cone of Cold into a DPS cooldown button. So this is going to give your Cone of Cold a 45-second cooldown. And if your Cone of Cold is able to hit 3 or more enemies, it's going to reset the cooldown of your Frozen Orb and your Comet Storm. And in addition, more importantly, Cone of Cold is going to apply Winter's Chill to all enemies hit. However, keep in mind that Cone of Cold's cooldown can no longer be reduced by your cooldown reduction effects. What this means is shifting power is no longer going to reset the cooldown of Cone of Cold. So this is just a flat out 45-second cooldown. So with Coldest Snap, this is another key component to our AoE burst. So like the tooltip read, if I throw out my Frozen Orb and I use my Comet Storm just to put them on cooldown, if I am to use Cone of Cold, it is going to not only apply Winter's Chill to all targets that I hit, but as you can see, my Comet Storm and my Frozen Orb are reset, so we can use them again 2 times back to back. Now, like I mentioned when we were talking about Comet Storm just a little bit ago, Comet Storm and Meteor are going to benefit from Winter's Chill, but they do not consume it. So what this means with Coldest Snap, because Coldest Snap is going to apply Winter's Chill to everything that we hit, while also resetting the cooldown of Comet Storm, this means that both casts of our Comet Storm can benefit from one application of Winter's Chill. So what this will look like is if you use Comet Storm, you want to immediately follow it up with Cone of Cold to apply Winter's Chill so that your Comets and Meteor are going to benefit from Shatter. Also, this is going to reset the cooldown of Comet Storm so you can then use it again within the 8-second window of Winter's Chill and have the second cast of Comet Storm and Meteor also benefit from that single application of Winter's Chill. So what this looks like is if we use Comet Storm, we use Cone of Cold to reset it and apply Winter's Chill. As you can see, everything crit. We can then use Comet Storm again into the same Winter's Chill and benefit from Shatter twice with one application. Because Coldest Snap turns Cone of Cold into a 45-second cooldown, this means that we are able to get one use of Cone of Cold inside of our Icy Veins window, and then one use of Cone of Cold outside of our Icy Veins window. This is similar to how Arcane plays with your Arcane Surge, Touch of the Magi window, and then in between every surge, you have one extra use of Touch of the Magi. It's a similar concept. And the reason that this lines up with Frost, albeit it's not perfect every single time, is because shifting power is going to be reducing the cooldown of Icy Veins. So essentially Icy Veins goes from being a 2-minute cooldown down towards closer to a minute 30, minute 40, depending on when and how many shifting powers you're able to get out. But again, what that means is within Icy Veins, you can use Cone of Cold, and then outside of Icy Veins, you can use Cone of Cold one more time, and that will put their cooldowns pretty much synced up perfectly, where the next time you use Icy Veins, you're going to have Cone of Cold available again. What this will look like is, again, during Icy Veins, you're going to use some time stacking up your Death's Chill, so you're not going to use Cone of Cold immediately. Now, when we're up to 15 stacks, we're going to use Comet Storm, Cone of Cold, and then since Cone of Cold is on a 45-second cooldown, Icy Veins is rolling. Ideally, we use Shifting Power after Icy Veins, but for demonstration in this video, if I use Shifting Power right now, it's going to reduce the cooldown of my Icy Veins. And when Cone of Cold comes back up, it is going to line up pretty perfectly with Icy Veins so that the next time I'm in Icy Veins, I'll have Cone of Cold available again. So as you can see here, Cone of Cold is just about to come off of cooldown, and my Icy Vein still has about 50 seconds remaining. So if I use Cone of Cold now, and I get my resets on my Frozen Orb and my Comet Storm, as you can see, Cone of Cold has about 40 seconds, Icy Veins has about 40 seconds as well. So these line up really, really well with each other. You just need to ensure that you're using Shifting Power to get the cooldown reduction on your Icy Veins to try and sync these up. So Shifting Power is a returning ability from Shadowlands. It's a channeled ability, and over the duration of this channel, you're going to be reducing the cooldown of pretty much all of your abilities by 12 seconds. Now, this is super important because it's going to be reducing the cooldown of Comet Storm, Frozen Orb, and Icy Veins in particular. Now, when you use Shifting Power, you want to try and ensure that your Comet Storm, your Frozen Orb, and your Icy Veins all have at least 10 to 12 or more seconds remaining on all 3 of their cooldowns to get the most benefit from every cast of Shifting Power that we possibly can. So what this will look like is if I use Comet Storm and Frozen Orb and Icy Veins just so that I can put them all on cooldown, as you can see, all of them have more than 10 to 12 seconds remaining on their cooldowns. So this is a good point to use Shifting Power. So I'm gaining the most cooldown reduction towards all 3 of my biggest buttons every single time that I press Shifting Power. Now this, in actual practice, you might not be able to do this every single time, but ideally you want to ensure that you're getting the most cooldown reduction on, again, Comet Storm, Frozen Orb, and Icy Veins as you possibly can every single time that you cast Shifting Power. Now, the most important 2 buffs that you need to be tracking in AoE as a Frostfire Mage are Excess Fire and Excess Frost. Now, Excess Fire reads, when you cast Comet Storm, this is going to cause your next Ice Lance to explode in a Frostfire Burst, which deals AoE damage. And Frostfire Burst has a 50% chance to grant Brain Freeze. When you use this Ice Lance and consume excess fire, you're going to gain excess frost. And this is super important to our AoE rotation. So when you have excess frost, when you use Flurry, it's going to cause an Ice Nova around your target, which does a little bit of AoE damage. But more importantly, it's going to reduce the cooldown of Comet Storm by 3 seconds. As we mentioned, Comet Storm is probably our highest damage throughout the course of most dungeons. So getting cooldown reduction on Comet Storm means that we're able to cast it more frequently. So you want to track excess frost and excess fire so you know when you have these two buffs to gain the most benefit from them. Now, I want you guys to think about excess fire as just added additional AoE damage on your Ice Lance, which has a chance to give you a brain freeze. And this feeds into giving you excess frost. If you do generate a brain freeze or, your next cast of Flurry, that's going to give you cooldown reduction towards your Comet Storm. So you want to know when you have excess frost so you can get the most cooldown reduction that you possibly can on your Comet Storm so that we can cast it as many times as we can throughout the course of a dungeon. Now, something to note that I want you guys to be aware of with excess fire and excess frost is that both of these buffs can only stack 2 times. Any further buff is basically going to go to waste. You can't stack this up beyond 3. So if you're sitting at 2 and you generate an extra excess frost or fire, it's essentially going to waste. So you need to make sure that you're using your Ice Lances and your Flurries appropriately to ensure that you're doing whatever you can to not overcap on these. And this comes into play, especially with excess fire in the AoE burst opener, because during our opener, we're going to actually be generating 3 excess fires throughout the course of our burst sequence. So we need to squeeze an Ice Lance in there to ensure that we are consuming an excess fire stack so that we're not overcapping. So the reason that we're going to be generating 3 stacks of excess fire in our AoE opener is because of 2 other talents here in our Frostfire hero talent tree, one of which is called Frostfire Empowerment, where you just randomly, while casting spells, have a chance to make your next Frostfire Bolt an instant cast spell that does more damage and it will explode into AoE. But more importantly, we have this talent here called Flash Freeze Burn, where when you use Frostfire Empowerment, so when you use this instant cast Frostfire Bolt, you're going to be gaining excess frost and excess fire. And more importantly, when you use Icy Veins, this is going to guarantee that your next Frostfire Bolt is going to be a Frostfire Empowered Frostfire Bolt instant cast, which is going to give us excess frost and excess fire. What this means in our opener is that our first Frostfire Bolt is going to be instant, giving us an excess fire. After that, we are going to be using Comet Storm 2 times throughout the course of our opener. And like I mentioned, excess fire can only stack 2 times. So throughout the course of the opener, and when we get into the rotation part of this video, I will explain how you want to go about avoiding, munching your 3rd stack of excess fire there by using an Ice Lance during our opener. So just as a quick demonstration of what we were just talking about, if I use Icy Veins, it is going to cause my next Frostfire Bolt to be an instant cast, and this is going to give me excess frost and excess fire. So let's hit Icy Veins. I gain Frostfire Empowerment. My next Frostfire Bolt is instant. As soon as I use that, I gain excess frost and excess fire. Now, Comet Storm is going to give us excess fire every time that we press that. So if I use Comet Storm, we're going to be up to 2 stacks of excess fire. Now, if I use Cone of Cold and I use Comet Storm again, I do not gain a 3rd stack of excess fire. So essentially that 3rd excess fire would go to waste. So what that means is we need to fit an Ice Lance into our opener to avoid munching that 3rd excess fire stack. All right, now let's talk about Glacial Spike. So Glacial Spike hits incredibly hard, and thanks to splitting ice, it's going to be hitting multiple targets in AoE. But Glacial Spike, even though it hits really hard, has a little bit of a lower priority than our Comet Storm, Frozen Orb, and Blizzard. If all 3 of those spells are on cooldown, your next priority is casting Glacial Spike. Now, ideally, you want to try and shatter Glacial Spike as often as you can. However, if you have no way to shatter Glacial Spike, you still want to send it because it does so much damage that you can't afford to just sit on it. Now, another thing is when you're at 5 icicles, the reason you just want to send it off, even if it won't shatter, is because you're going to be generating additional icicles. And those icicles, if you generate additional past 5, they will still shoot off and hit your target, but they hardly do any damage. And you would much rather have those icicles being generated to go towards your next Glacial Spike. So as soon as you hit 5 icicles, you want to try and use Glacial Spike, shatter it if you can, but if you can't, don't worry about it. You still want to send it so that any future icicles that you're generating are going towards your next cast of Glacial Spike, because you want to be getting out as many Glacial Spikes as often as you can. While we're on the topic of Glacial Spike, let's read our 4-piece. So our 4-piece says, casting Glacial Spike has a 100% chance to also cast a Pyroblast, which deals fire damage and applies Ignite. So every time that we cast Glacial Spike as a Frostfire Mage, we're going to be shooting out Pyroblasts. However, the Pyroblast that comes from our tier set bonus calculates its shatter condition when you first start casting Glacial Spike, not at the very end of the Glacial Spike cast. So what this means is you need to have Winter's Chill applied to the target before you start casting your Glacial Spike if you want the Pyroblast to also benefit from Shatter. Now, historically, as a Frost Mage, the combo would look something like this. When you have 5 Icicles, you would queue up a Glacial Spike and follow it up with a Flurry so that the Flurry hits first and the Glacial Spike then hits into Winter's Chill and benefits from Shatter. However, as I just said, the Pyroblast that comes out does not benefit from Shatter the same way that Glacial Spike does. So if I am to use Glacial Spike here and follow it up with a Flurry, the Pyroblast that comes out, luckily crit there, but that was probably just chance. That Pyroblast doesn't benefit from Winter's Chill in the same way that my Glacial Spike does. The way that we want to do this to ensure that that Pyroblast is critting, and this is particularly important in single target, is to shoot out Flurry before you start casting your Glacial Spike, so that Winter's Chill is already on the target before you even start casting your Glacial Spike. This is what is going to contribute to your Pyroblast being able to benefit from Shatter. So again, when you have 5 Icicles, if you have Flurry, you want to shoot it out so that you have Winter's Chill on the target first, and then cast your Glacial Spike so that the Pyroblast also has an increased chance to crit. Again, as we discussed earlier, if you are in AoE against mobs that can be frozen, when you cast Glacial Spike, you can use either Ice Nova, Frost Nova, or your pet's Freeze ability to force Glacial to shatter on whatever target it cleaves onto. So again, as we can see here, if I target one of these random target dummies and cast Glacial Spike, if I use Frost Nova, it's going to freeze everything, and both of my Glacial Spikes are going to be shattering and hopefully critting, doing way more damage than if I were to just sit back and shoot a Glacial Spike into these targets without attempting to shatter them. Now that we've discussed key talents and abilities and spell interactions, let's get into the actual rotation. So we're going to start out by doing the burst opener. This is going to include using Icy Veins and stacking up our Death's Chill. Now this is a very fast sequence of spells. As a Frost Mage, we stack Haste. Icy Veins gives us haste, and if you are under the effects of Time Warp or Bloodlust, you're going to have even more haste. So this can go really quickly. We're going to do this in full speed initially, and then afterwards we're going to do it. We're going to break it down and go slower so I can commentate every single button that we're going to want to press and why we want to press them in a particular order. One thing I want you guys to also make note of before we start is that I have a global cooldown tracker down here in the bottom right above my details damage meter. So you guys are going to see icons for what spells I'm pressing in what order. So definitely keep an eye out on that if things get too fast or overwhelming. So to get started, this is what our burst rotation in full speed is going to look like. So I'm going to start by throwing a Frozen Orb and dropping a Blizzard, popping Icy Veins and stacking up my Death's Chill. So I'm going to cast 5 Frostfire Bolts. Once I'm at max Death's Chill, I'm going to Comet Storm, Cone of Cold, Blizzard, Frozen Orb, throw an Ice Lance, use another Comet Storm, and from here, I'm going to be consuming my excess Frost and excess Fire to help generate up to my next Glacial Spike. As soon as Frozen Orb and Blizzard are off cooldown, you want to be dropping them, and in the interim, you want to be using your procs and your Frostfire Bolts to generate up to your next Glacial Spike and ripping it as soon as possible. As soon as Frozen Orb is available, you want to send it. When Comet Storm is up, send it and follow it up with an Ice Nova or a Frost Nova. You want to make sure that you are using Shifting Power to reduce the cooldown of your Comet Storm, your Frozen Orb, and your Icy Veins. And from there, we are going to follow our standard Frost Mage AoE rotation as per usual. Okay, so again, I know that that is a lot to process when you're doing that rotation at full speed. So we're going to break it down and go a little bit slower so that I can go spell by spell and explain to you guys why we're pressing certain buttons in that sequence. Now, you guys are going to see I'm going to have some cooldowns come up that we're not going to be pressing immediately as we normally would when we're doing this in a real scenario, just for demonstrations purposes, so I can kind of explain each individual spell and why we're pressing them. So to start, the reason that we want to throw out Frozen Orb and Blizzard initially is so that we have damage rolling when we pop Icy Veins and we start stacking up our Death's Chill. I'll throw out a Frozen Orb and drop a Blizzard. My next button is going to be Icy Veins. From here, we're going to ignore all of our procs. We're going to stack up Death's Chill. I'm going to go all the way up to max stacks for this video. So we're at 15 stacks of Death's Chill. Once you're there, your next button is going to be Comet Storm, followed up by Cone of Cold. use Blizzard, Frozen Orb, throw out an Ice Lance, and then Comet Storm again. The reason we want to do the spells in this order is because Comet Storm into Cone of Cold. Cone of Cold is going to apply Winter's Chill. So Comet Storm and Meteor are going to be benefiting from Winter's Chill, but not consuming it. Cone of Cold is then going to reset our Frozen Orb and our Comet Storm. So we want to use Frozen Orb on cooldown, Blizzard on cooldown. We want to throw in an Ice Lance as well, because during this sequence, we're going to be generating 3 stacks of excess fire, but we can only have 2 stacks at any given time. So before you press your second Comet Storm, you want to use Ice Lance to consume one of your excess fire stacks, so that when you use your next Comet Storm, you're not munching a stack of excess fire. From there, after you use your second Comet Storm and your Frozen Orb and your Blizzard are on cooldown, like I mentioned, you want to focus then on casting Glacial Spike. If you don't have 5 Icicles, your next priority is going to be using Fingers of Frost, instant cast Frostfire Bolts, Flurries to generate up to 5 Icicles again so that you can use Glacial Spike. So in AoE, inside and outside of our cooldowns, our spell priority is going to look something like this. You need to prioritize shattering Comet Storm every single time that you press it. Next up, you need to use Frozen Orb on cooldown. Follow that up with Blizzard on cooldown. The reason that you want to use Frozen Orb as a higher priority than Blizzard is because Blizzard is going to be contributing cooldown reduction to Frozen Orb. So if you put down a Blizzard and you still have Frozen Orb available, you're missing out on potential cooldown reduction that you could be having going to your next Frozen Orb. So anytime that you have Frozen Orb available, you want to prioritize sending that out as soon as you can. After Comet Storm, Frozen Orb, and Blizzard are on cooldown, your next priority is using Glacial Spike if you have 5 Icicles. If you do not have 5 Icicles, you need to prioritize using your Ice Lances, your instant cast Frostfire Bolts, and your Flurries to help generate up to 5 Icicles so that you can use Glacial Spike. And then from there, anytime that Comet Storm is available, you need to shatter it, use Frozen Orb as soon as it's available, Blizzard on cooldown. Again, outside of that, you can use Shifting Power when your Comet Storm, your Frozen Orb, and your Icy Veins all have 10 to 12 plus seconds remaining on their cooldown so that you get the most value out of every Shifting Power cast with the most cooldown reduction that you can possibly get on your main 3 abilities. Outside of that, again, you want to be tracking your excess frost and your excess fire. These contribute a lot to our damage, but they seem very passive at first. But if you're tracking these, you'll know when you want to use them. And as we mentioned earlier, excess fire basically will give you extra AoE damage on your Ice Lance and a chance to give you a Brain Freeze. Excess frost, when you consume it by casting a Flurry or using your Brain Freeze proc, you're going to be gaining cooldown reduction to your Comet Storm. As we mentioned earlier, Comet Storm does the majority of your damage in AoE, especially Meteor, and we need to make sure it crits. So focus on shattering that every single time that you can and getting as much cooldown reduction through excess frost that you possibly can. All right, guys, I hope you found today's video useful. Let me know in the comments below if this video helps you out. I would recommend that you guys go and practice this on some target dummies for a little bit. Make sure that you're able to get that exact sequence of spells down and understand how all of our talents interact with each other and how you can get the most out of things like excess frost, excess fire, cooldown reduction, or shifting power. Make sure that you're stacking up Death's Chill and getting the most out of your Comet Storm and Frozen Orb resets with Cone of Cold. But with that said, again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out.